Almost a week after the election, protesters are taking to the streets across the country to express their frustration with the results of the election. Many protesters have been expressing anger and fear towards policies President-elect Trump promised to enact throughout the campaign. To discuss the post-election turmoil, I'm joined today by American University professor Charles Lewis. Professor Lewis is also the executive editor of the investigative reporting workshop housed at American University. Professor Lewis, thank you for being here.
Oh, happy to be here.
So can you talk about what about this election or the results of the election have led us to these intense reactions from protesters across the country?
Well, you know, in the annals of presidential politics in the last 30 or 40 years, probably longer, well, actually, the last century, we never had a television celebrity billionaire with no electoral experience run for office, and we've never had as inflamed a campaign as this, not in recent memory, not in the last half century at least. So normally you have fringe candidates who say inflammatory things. We've had populists go around saying things for years on the Democratic side, and we've had conservative, equally conservative or more conservative than Donald Trump also have inflamed campaigns. Barry Goldwater comes to mind, 1964, getting the nomination. But what has happened here is without precedent. So it's hard to measure it against anything in the past. When you have large segments of the population, factions, populations that are inflamed with rage, you're going to have protests, and you're going to have anger, and you're going to have deep, deep worry. This is a very deeply concerned country right now. At least half of it is, and this is not going to end in a 3-day or 5-day short week. It's going to go on for months.
You think these protests will continue throughout the Trump presidency, or is it more reactionary just in this post-election period?
I think both. I think it's reactionary now, but I don't think these protesters don't accept this candidate as a viable candidate or a viable president. It is some of the comments that were made about certain nationalities, certain populations in America, and those folks aren't going to stop being frustrated and angry. They don't see this president as their president. And usually, and even if he sends a tweet that seems friendly, all 140 characters of it, after a 1.5-year campaign, that's slightly offensive by itself, as though a tweet is going to ameliorate millions of people who are, basically terrified. Some of them, they actually are afraid that that things are going to happen to them politically and otherwise, actually, in this country. So this is a very dangerous. I think it's a very concerning time in this history of our country.
Earlier this week, Kellyanne Conway addressed some of these protesters. Let's take a look at that interview.
Sure.
I think the President of the United States, Secretary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, perhaps others can come forward and ask for calm and ask for a peaceful transition and ask their supporters, which are masquerading as protesters now, many of them professional and paid, by the way, I'm sure, ask them to give this man a chance.
So she mentions potentially paid protesters. Do we have any evidence to suggest that protesters right now are paid by another corporation or organization, or has that happened in the past?
Move On and some other groups have staged protests of various sorts. I don't think the protesters are paid, but there may be folks who are organizing some of these events. I don't really know personally, but it's not as though Trump rallies are not organized and that there aren't people paid for that. So these are people that clearly didn't like Trump prior to Election Day, and they still don't like him. It's not opinions and passions are not turned on like a light switch or turned off. These are going to linger for weeks and months, and choosing people that are known to have thrown racial epithets certain ways and putting that person in the White House is not exactly ameliorate those concerns. So as long as you keep getting a dual message that, oh, we deeply feel your pain and we care, but then you have certain people in position who basically are known as white nationalists, you can't be overly shocked that there's people upset. And I don't think they have to be paid to walk in the streets for that.
In his 60-minute interview, Donald Trump addressed some of his supporters in response to these protests. Let's hear what he has to say.
They're harassing Latinos, Muslims.
I am so saddened to hear that, and I say stop it. If it helps, I will say this, and I'll say it right to the camera, stop it.
Stop it. Do you think this statement will have an impact on his supporters and the protests moving forward?
Not at all. Short answer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it appears to be insincere. You can't make a comment like that, stop it, and then meanwhile have inflammatory rhetoric and have other things going on simultaneously. Some people at least, see it as disingenuous. And I don't think that's unreasonable. It's not about partisanship. This is about common sense. If someone has altercations at their rallies and is saying inflammatory things for months and months, just saying stop it in a 60 Minutes interview is, well, it's like giving the back of your hand to somebody. It's offensive by itself. It's insincere. And I think anyone, regardless of their party or their politics, that would see that that's exactly that. It's not real.
Mm-hmm. Since the election, he's begun walking back some of that intense rhetoric that he had during the campaign. Is that in response to these protests, or is this just him beginning to lead?
Well, we would all like to believe the latter, that he's beginning to lead. And I think part of him probably really does want to be president of all the people. But then we will see who he appoints. And will he have, for example, will he have any Democrats in his administration? Other presidents have had folks from other parties. I think a lot of this comes down to the appointment process, to being on message that does not alienate for more than a few minutes, like days or weeks or months. Then talk to us, or do a State of the Union address in January that looks open and wide to the entire population. I think people are going to watch and see what they think from this. And I think at the moment there's no reason to believe it. Mm-hmm. It's only a few days since the election, and these factions are still pretty angry and jacked up on both sides. And so, this is without precedent in U.S. history, this election, for lots of reasons. And the passions are extremely high, and I don't expect them to get too much lower in the days ahead unless people start seeing some evidence of true openness towards all views.
So as he begins to change his rhetoric, can we expect a change in policy, or do these protesters still have cause for concern for safety and for rights that they may have had under a different presidency?
Well, we don't know exactly every policy he's going to do, but he is going to partially dismantle health care. First time in U.S. history we had a health care policy. It will be dismantled, not entirely, it will be altered or amended. The good news, I guess, is that it's not going to be completely knocked down. If you're into healthcare, I think that's probably a useful thing in society. And you'll see what he does with each policy. And we don't know enough. He doesn't even know exactly what his policies are going to be. He hasn't even made his appointments yet, really, except for a couple people in the White House. So I think we have to see what he has advocated. Including the wall, with Mexico, and now it might not be completely a wall, it'll be a partial wall, and a fence, and where's your thesaurus? Think of other words. And so we're going to just watch all this play out over several days, and the Democrats, for example, are going to have their issues about how to proceed and how to respond. The U.S. Senate is going to have significant issues come up that are going to require bipartisanship to get anything passed. Will they be able to achieve that, the Democrats I'm talking about? And so this is not all about just Trump and the Republicans. The Democrats are split and frustrated and upset. We're just hours, really, days away from the election result, and it's going to take weeks, months, really, for this to settle out.
Only time will tell.
Exactly.
Well, thank you, Professor Lewis, so much for being with us today.
Sure.
Professor Lewis is a professor in the School of Communications at American University and the executive editor of the Investigative Reporting Workshop here at AU. Republicans are staying in control of the House and Senate. Democrats are reorganizing and strategizing. Reporter Chelsea Smart is in the Flash studio with more.
Thanks, Wes. Though there is a lot of buzz about unexpected presidential election results, perhaps equally as important, congressional elections also took us by surprise. I spoke to experts that will explain what they expected, what happened, and what are the implications. Let's take a listen. Several unexpected legislators are headed to the Capitol building.
This is a unique election because of the presidential election, but also because of the election in the House and the Senate. Going into the last week of this election, it looked like the Democrats would flip the Senate. It would become Democratic. They didn't, which was a great surprise. The House of Representatives was supposed to lose 15 to 20 Republican seats, and still will continue to be Republican.
With an unexpected congressional majority and the presidency in the hands of Republicans, dynamics between President-elect Donald Trump and congressional Republicans are already changing.
I expect that that almost all of the Republicans in Congress will line up to kiss his ring.
With the balance of power in the hands of one political party, experts expect fast change.
He'll have a clear shot to do what he wants. He'll have control of the House of Representatives, control of the U.S. Senate, and he'll have control of the Supreme Court. So whatever measures he wants to take, it's his to take.
Democrats did not elect the first female president and did not flip the Senate, but they did elect several first-of-their-kind legislators. Kamala Harris is the first biracial woman to serve in the Senate. Catherine Cortez Masto is the first Latina senator. And Tammy Duckworth will be the first woman to have served in a combat zone and the second Asian American woman to serve in the Senate. Though diversity is always something to celebrate, these firsts are all representatives of the Democratic Party. Under Republican control, experts are telling me that diversity might not make a difference. With Republicans controlling the legislature, the White House, and likely the Supreme Court, the district might be in for some more productivity. Back to you, Wes.
Coming up, exit polls from the presidential election showed some surprising insights into how Donald Trump was elected president. We'll break down some of these numbers and voter demographics after the break.